Hey, good evening, good night, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in to this session, the first in our series of events hosted by PILS, where we will be doing deep dives into several of the functional areas within the pharmaceutical industry. And so for tonight's deep dive, we will be focusing on the functional areas that fall under the umbrella of regulatory affairs. And so we'll be discussing regulatory labeling, regulatory policy, regulatory CMC, which is, I believe, chemistry, manufacturing, and controls, and also regulatory advertising and promotion. So we'll start off by kind of introducing, allowing everyone on the panel to introduce themselves. Um, I guess I can start since I'm hosting the event for tonight. My name is Shanice Taylor. I am a pharmacist by training. I graduated fairly recently from Howard University College of Pharmacy. I completed a postdoctoral fellowship with Novo Nordisk in the functional area in which I work in now, so regulatory advertising and promotion. And I recently started over at GSK, GlaxoSmithKline, in their regulatory advertising and promotion policy group, actually this past May, so still fairly new to the role, or to GSK rather. I support some of our specialty products, and I'll get into, I guess, more detail on what exactly regulatory advertising and promotion is. But I'll be your host for this evening, and I'll kick it over to Danielle, one of our panelists, to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I know it's probably late and you guys, some of you are students, and this is probably the last place you want to be, but I promise this should be pretty fun for you to learn some new interesting stuff about pharma. I've been in pharma for about 20 years, not always in regulatory. I've spanned the gamut from non-clinical studies through discovery into then some regulatory work. I've been in regulatory for about 14 years. I've been in CMC regulatory. Shanice, you are correct. Chemistry, manufacturing, and controls. And I'm actually also doing a rotational training with Shanice's group at the advertising and promotional unit at GSK. Just sort of looking to switch gears a little bit myself. So that's me in a nutshell. I look forward to giving you guys some good information.
Thanks, Danielle. So I'll go ahead and kick it over to Mary to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mary Legacki. I am a pharmacist also by training. I graduated from Howard University a little bit before Shanice did. I currently work at Pharma as the Director of Diversity in Clinical Trials under the Science and Regulatory Advocacy Department. But prior to that, I finished my postdoctorate fellowship at Eli Lilly in regulatory policy. And I did work for a time at Merck in regulatory labeling prior to the position that I am in currently. And I'm excited to be here with you guys.
Thank you so much, Mary, for that introduction. And then last but certainly not least, Arthur, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, hey everyone, good evening. Thank you for having me. My name's Arthur Legacki. I am a labeling manager at Regeneron. I've been with Regeneron for a little over a month, and prior to that, I was at a company called PRA Health Sciences. They are a CRO, or a clinical or contract research organization that works with many different pharma companies. I first got into labeling through my FDA rotation. I graduated from the University of Georgia 2 years ago and did an APP rotation at the FDA, learned all about labeling, and really decided to pursue a career in labeling because I was able to leverage my scientific background and work in drug development too. So yeah, looking forward to the panel, looking forward to meeting with students, because we were all there at some point in time. And yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you. So you guys have virtually met all of our panelists. The way that the evening will be structured is that for the first maybe 25 minutes or so, each of us will kind of go through and answer some questions about kind of our positions, what we do, how we got there. And then the last half of the event will be us breaking into individual rooms where you will be able to have more of an intimate session with, whichever panelists, whichever functional area you decide to go in and learn more about. You can ask specific questions there. Feel free to come off camera at that point, or you can come off camera now, it's up to you. But that's kind of how the event will be structured. So Arthur, I'm gonna actually start with you since you finished us off. You went a little into kind of how you broke into labeling, but if you could just elaborate a little bit more on essentially why you chose the functional area that you're in and what you did to prepare for that role.
Yeah, absolutely. So as PharmDs, we are qualified to really work in any functional area, in regulatory, medical affairs, clinical, pharmacovigilance. That there's a wide array of opportunities that pharmacists are qualified for. So that was one thing that was really appealing to me about pharma, is that you can have a really diverse career, jump from one functional area to another. You could learn so much and bring so much knowledge to it. I was interested in reg mostly because of my FDA rotation. I was really interested in medical affairs too, just because of how many PharmDs go into the MSL space. But yeah, after I did my FDA rotation, I was really focused on applying to reg and med affairs jobs. Interviewed for both and just got a reg job in labeling. So it was really pure luck. But when you are applying, just because of how difficult it could be to break into the field as a new student, I would say really just to cast a wide net, and just do whatever you could to break in, and that once you're in, you could really jump from one function to another throughout your career. Whichever function you go into, it'll be a really interesting path, and you always have the opportunity to move around.
Thank you so much. And I'm actually going to stay with you, Arthur. If you could kind of, maybe we should have did this first, explain exactly what labeling is, what you do, yeah, and maybe what an average day looks like for you.
Yeah, so I've been doing labeling for 2 years, and I still have difficulty trying to explain what I actually do. But yeah, what the label is pretty much all the information that you as a healthcare provider need about the drug. So whenever you go into a database like Micromedics or Lexicomp, Up to Date, all those databases are linked to the drug label. You'll be able to find information like the indication. You'll be able to find adverse drug reactions, mechanism of action, ClinPharm. You'll find information about the studies. And in order to get all that information about a drug, you work with a number of teams. So you work with your ClinPharm people, your toxicology people, you work with the physicians that led the studies, you work with med affairs and commercial, a number of individuals in reg. You work with just a variety of people, which is what I love about my job. Is I get to work with people that are pros in marketing. I get to work with physicians. I get to work with people that are PhDs and subject matter experts in a number of different fields. So yeah, we have all these people that are subject matter experts in their own particular field. So whether you're developing a brand new label, or you're updating information from a new clinical trial or a new adverse drug event that has to be reported. You're working with a number of people, and this applies to not only the label for the drug for the USPI, for the US prescribing information, or the package insert, as a lot of people would call it, but for every single label for every country that the drug is marketed in. So you have the SMPC in Europe, you have the label in Canada, you have the label in Japan. You have to work on the label that is in every single, that the drug is marketed in every country. So yeah, it's a wide variety of work, and you get to work with really intelligent people, and that's really what I love about my job.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Mary, I'm going to come to you next. Essentially the same questions. What exactly do you do? What does that look like, maybe an average day? And then kind of also in the same breath, how did you choose that functional area, and what did you do to prepare yourself for that role?
Okay. Yeah. So I currently work for the trade organization Pharma. And in a nutshell, we're a pharmaceutical trade organization, and we advocate and lobby for initiatives supported by pharmaceutical companies, which are our member companies. I specifically support the Science and Regulatory Advocacy Department, but as the Director of Diversity and Clinical Trials. So I was hired on to really push our kind of multiple member-wide initiative of increasing diversity in clinical trials. So it's a little bit kind of beside the regulatory policy space. I'm in more so regulatory advocacy, but I did complete my postdoc fellowship in regulatory policy at Eli Lilly, and that has a very similar kind of taste, if you would say. Basically, I worked like day to day to research policies that directly impact drug development, and kind of worked with co-member organizations on the other side at Eli Lilly, like with Merck and Genentech and other companies, to really push forth policies that would be ultimately taken up by pharma that would lobby on our behalf. I guess what made me really interested in this field, or kind of what was, I guess like my origin story, when I was a pharmacy student, I was really curious about regulatory processes and how that impacted drug development. And I think what really piqued that interest was a international rotation where I had that responsibility of researching and writing a manuscript on regulatory gap capacities that was seen in multiple Southern African nations. So it's called SADC, the 13 Southern African nations. I found that to be really interesting, just because you looking at national policies that directly impact regulatory capabilities that indirectly impact access to medicine. If that makes sense. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but I think that really ties back into my current position, because I work very closely currently with our health equity partners and our policy department on initiatives that really advocate for diversity in clinical trials. And so for a day-to-day, like I guess a day in my week would be multiple calls with our subject matter experts at different member companies, really to delve into the issues that they encounter when trying to enroll or create diverse clinical trials, and bring in or working together to find strategies that mitigate those issues.
Thanks, Mary. Okay, so Danielle, I'm coming to you for the same question, essentially. Tell us kind of what you do, what exactly regulatory CMC is, what an average day looks like, and how you kind of prepared yourself for why you chose it.
So interestingly, I actually didn't mention, so my undergrad was in biology, and I had gotten my a master's degree from regulatory at Temple. So it's actually in regulatory affairs and quality assurance. It's a 2-year program. And so, through my pharma career, I knew that I wanted to do more. And so when I went into the regulatory program, I realized that, there's such a huge gamut of this regulatory or this drug development world, right? So for everyone on the call, I think the biggest thing, and Arthur started it, and Mary, you echoed it as well, is that there's always these matrix teams. So there's always a team. There's always a holistic, all the way around team where I have someone from Shanice's group. I sit with someone in Arthur's group. I know people that do advocacy work at GSK as well. So there's soup to nuts if you put your mind to it and the skill sets that you like. As far as CMC goes, it is the chemistry and the analytical pieces of the drug product. So it's the beginning stages. For what I do is I manage the submissions. I manage them globally. So same as Arthur was saying, every country has their own regulations. So some are tighter than others, some are stricter, the whole thing around storage conditions. If you go to Brazil versus if you are going to Alaska, you have to have different storage settings. And one of the things that my teams do is they set those boundaries to make sure that whether it's at 80 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 below Fahrenheit, it's stable product. And so my job is to work with those teams and those experts, put all of that information in a report, generate it out to the agencies, and respond to any of their questions. Now, I, excuse me, I specifically work in small molecules. So you will not have I do not work with monoclonal antibodies, MABs, which are large molecules, which generally come from animal proteins. A small molecule is a synthetic drug. So I'm using a lot of very, very broad range chemistry terminology because, as I said, I'm a biologist. So the funniest thing, Shanice, one of the questions was, well, how did you choose to go to CMC regulatory? Well, I chose to go to regulatory, and I think CMC chose me. 13 years later, I still really enjoy it. One of the things I enjoy the most, as I alluded to, is this matrix team model where we sit on a team and you really do learn all of the other functionalities, in which case that is why I'm now looking into possibly moving over into the advertising and promotional field. It's very similar in the role that I play, it's just different regulations. And it would probably be mainly US versus the globe. But yeah, so what you'll see in my work is the label that Arthur was talking about. A lot of what the scientists do in my line fill into the labeling, and we get the approvals through the countries. That feeds into the SMMP and the storage conditions and all of that fun stuff as well. So, and then Mary's team fits into my group by helping alleviate some of, if we have something called the quality by design. So we design the study, and as long as we stay within that experiment, we shouldn't have to send change control documentation to the regulators. And so I'm sure Mary's group does some of that stuff for us, and Pharma is, one of our huge advocates to help us with that kind of stuff. I'm probably the most boring one on the phone, so you know.
No, trust me, somebody on the call is interested.
There's a lot of chemists out there. If you're in pharmacy school, you definitely love chemistry. So.
Exactly. So I'm sure it's piquing somebody's interest, so no worries. So I'll kind of follow in on the tail end with what I do in regulatory advertising and promotion. So regulatory advertising and promotion that group is responsible for understanding the laws and regulations that govern drug or prescription advertising and promotion. So anything that's considered promotion would be a patient brochure that has all the information on the drug, a television commercial, a website, a podcast. Like there are all sorts of different things that are considered promotional. Anything that the sales force uses when they go out to talk with doctors about the products, all of those items are considered promotional. And so it's no secret that the pharmaceutical industry is one of the most regulated industries. And so the things that we say in how we promote our drug and how we try to sell our drug is highly regulated. There's so much that we can't say. And for the things that we can say, we have to say them in very specific ways. In addition, the US, along with New Zealand, are the only two countries that in which direct to consumer promotion is legal. And so there's a lot around that, especially when you talk about a drug company promoting to an average consumer who, unlike the people on this call, don't have, that higher science level education, or may not be able to speak the language that we speak as scientists, chemists, pharmacists, et cetera, right? So we are ensuring that the drug companies are kind of staying within that ballpark of what is appropriate. We have external and internal responsibilities. So our external responsibilities would be us liaising between the Office of Prescription Drug Promotion, OPDP, which is the office within the FDA that kind of looks over all the promotional materials and governs them, and kind of sets out the guidance of what should be followed and how we can promote on certain things or on products. And our internal responsibilities are working very closely with the commercial folks, so marketing folks, our legal representative, and also medical representative, to ensure that the pieces that the commercial team is developing is in fact in line with those regulations. And so I guess an average day would be, I am looking on the computer system that we have where the commercial team uploads their marketing pieces to, and I'm reviewing pieces all day. So today I was looking at an email that they want to send out to patients. So I'm reading every word of that email to see, like, okay, what are we saying about the drug? If we're including claims, benefit claims, so you're saying that this drug can do X, you need to make sure that you have all of the risk information, because you can't just tell someone all of the good things about the drug, right? That's misleading. You have to balance that with risk information. So what are the adverse events? What are the major risks? If a product has a black box warning, what is that? Like, all of that information has to be included, because you want to make sure that the promotional piece is balanced, meaning that for all the benefit claims that you're presenting, you're also presenting the risks in a comparable fashion. So you're not like having all the benefits like big, pretty, and colorful, and the risks are just black and white, really small at the bottom. And you also want to make sure that the information that you're putting out is truthful and non-misleading. So that's what I'm doing. I'm reviewing the pieces. We've been working on a television commercial that we're trying to get launched for the product that I'm working on. And that has been all encompassing. Like, you're watching the ad 50,000 times, you're like looking at the storyboard. So not just the actual video of the ad, but like a printout of like each scene, and like looking at the words that they're saying and the music that's playing and how loud is the music. When, at the end of the television, all the risks. We're making sure that I'm sure you guys would think that, like, it's super fast, they speed through it, but we're making sure that it's not too fast, that the average consumer would be able to understand what's being said, that the language is at a 6th grade reading level. So all of these different things, I feel like it's a job that you're not so much working in the black and white of things, but you operate a lot in the gray, because though you do have the regulations that you have to abide by, the way that people interpret those regulations and apply them to the promotional pieces varies from person to person. And so it's very interesting work, I would say. It keeps me challenged, because I feel like it's a job that you have to actually do to get better at. It just really takes time and experience. Like, you can know the regulations like the back of your hand, but if you don't know how to apply them to an email or to a TV commercial or to a website page, then there's a disconnect there. So how I kind of got on this train, I mentioned that I was a pharmacist. In my final year, we had to do our API rotations. And so I did an API rotation at OPDP with the FDA. And so that was my intro into the regulatory advertising and promotion world. I honestly had no idea about it. When I heard about regulatory affairs, I only thought about like the CMC type of work. That was really the only thing that I knew about. And so had no clue there were so many other things. And so that rotation at OPDP really kind of opened the door for me. I did another rotation with Pfizer, in which I sat in on those meetings that you have, where it's the regulatory person, which would be myself, the medical person, the legal person, the marketing person. So sitting in on those meetings and hearing the conversations that were being had. I just thought it was so interesting. As far as, and then I did my postdoc fellowship with Novo Nordisk. It's a 1-year program. It's not affiliated with an academic institution, but I learned so much from that experience. So I think I can stop there with that one and move on to the next question.
And Shanice, I'll just have to put in one more thing. You probably never watch a commercial the same way again.
No, I literally everything has to stop. I'm looking, I'm like reading the little words at the bottom.
My daughter's like, Mom, really? Every commercial? I'm like, yeah, I gotta see if
every
this is
commercial.
good.
Because you got to look and make sure that everything's on the up and up, right? And then it's also like, it helps you because you're like picking things out. So it's like an exercise for you.
It becomes a little obsession.
Exactly.
And I'm in awe of Shanice, like I said, because although I've been doing regulatory a lot longer than her, I won't show my age, but yeah, it definitely is a coveted position that it is a lot. There's a lot of gray. And when you do as much analytical, like science with data as I do, it's a nice change for me to look forward to.
Yeah, for sure. So Mary.
Shanice, I think you muted yourself.
Just kidding. I was saying that I'm coming to you with the last question, and this will be the last question before we break out into, I think this might be one of the last questions before we break out. What would you say is, I guess, the most satisfying part about your job, and then the most challenging?
Yeah, I think I have to think about that a little bit, but I think the most satisfying, to kind of be clear, I've been in my role for about 5 months. So I'm still learning quite a bit about my role and feel very new. But I think the most satisfying part of my job is just how quickly we move in the advocacy space, policy space. And so because of that, we oftentimes hit milestones relatively quickly. And also you work with a multitude of partners. So I'm working with not only numerous internal colleagues, but external, what we call subject matter experts at our member companies. And we use kind of our collaborative or collective insights to address issues as they arise in the drug development space. And so that is probably the most gratifying. And on the flip side, that could be also the most challenging part of it, because the reality is you don't necessarily own any projects or advocacy pieces or policy pieces. So because of that, you get a ton of insight from others, and you're constantly updating your work streams or your work with more of a collaborative effort. So it can be really challenging keeping in line all of the feedback that we're getting, and also ensuring that we're addressing them accordingly and updating individuals who might have given a piece of feedback and then we don't hear from them for a few weeks. And then, it looks different once they see it again. So that could be the most challenging part.
Mm-hmm. Could you also answer how perhaps students and pharmacists could potentially break into your role without maybe any other, regulatory experience like FDAs or internships? Is there a way in which to do so?
Yeah, I think at least for my path, I did a fellowship in regulatory policy, but I think one thing that you can do is network and get as close to the space as possible. So try your best to break into regulatory in general. I know regulatory policy groups are relatively small at companies, and they do look for people with quite a bit of experience. So it can be kind of hard to get into, but one thing that I noticed, at least within my group, is that individuals didn't start off in regulatory policy or regulatory advocacy. I have my senior director started off as a clinical pharmacist and then broke in, after a number of years of clinical practice. So I think it's really about expanding your network and learning as much about the field as possible and talking to as many people as possible, and just being really honest with the path that you want to be on and communicating that to as many people, because you never know who can open a door for you.
Yeah, that's really good. Thank you so much. Arthur, I'm coming to you next with the same kind of series of questions. So first, what is the most satisfying part about your job, the most challenging? And then do you think, or what are some ways that maybe students and pharmacists could possibly break in, maybe without direct experience in this?
Yeah, first question, what is the most satisfying part of my job? Definitely working on either a brand new drug, bringing it to patients that have very little treatment or no treatment at all, working on a brand new indication that'll expand access to patients that don't have current adequate treatment, just being able to work on new drugs or new indications that help improve patients' quality of life is very, I'd say, very meaningful to me. You know, we probably all know someone that is affected by cancer or affected by a rare disease. And all that people want at the end of the day is to be able to live a happy, healthy life. So when you're working on drugs that can improve people's quality of life, that can lengthen their lifespan, that is definitely very meaningful and very fulfilling. Something challenging. One interesting part about the labeling process is that when you're working on a label and you submit it to FDA or to Health Canada or EMA in Europe, what a lot of people don't know is that there's a lot of negotiation that goes back and forth between the pharma company and the regulatory authority. So, you know, the pharma company will, you know, get all the numbers from the clinical trial. Biostats will crunch those numbers, present them. We submit them to the health authority. FDA might take those same numbers, crunch them their own way, do their own calculations, and that they'll view things differently than the pharma company does. So that there's a lot of negotiations that go back and forth between the pharma company and the health authority, and that could be with ADRs, with indication, with clinical trials, with all different sections all throughout the label. And you know when you look at the US package insert, there are around 16 different sections that have text that go that's used by the healthcare provider, and we need to make sure that all that text is accurate and clear and concise. And if we write something that we find to be effective one way, but FDA or EMA or a different health authority don't agree, there's negotiations that go back and forth, and that, you know, it could be anywhere from 3, 4, 5. I've seen up to like 8 to 10 rounds of negotiations that go back and forth. And you know, FDA, EMA, they have really, really tight deadlines. So you might get a label back on a Friday from FDA, and that might ruin your weekend because you might have a deadline of, you know, Monday, end of business day, to submit it back. So when you're going through label negotiations, there are very tight timelines, and you need to present it to the regulatory team, to the clinical team. You need to present it to senior management. You need to bring it to a number of levels and get approval from everyone. So yeah, that could be the challenging aspect, but it's also really interesting too. And any advice on how to break into it? So I didn't do a fellowship. I applied, I interviewed for fellowships, made it to final round interviews, but didn't make the cut, and that could be really really upsetting. But you find a way to turn it around and to benefit from it. So yeah, PharmDs are definitely more than qualified to work in labeling. I think that like 90% of my team, 90% of my labeling team are all PharmDs. So yeah, there are plenty of opportunities to learn about how to get into labeling. I mean, networking, just reach out to people on LinkedIn, learn about what they do, attend these kind of webinars, just read the regulations to get an understanding of what labeling is so that you could have something to talk about. There are so many different guidances and regulations for the USPI, for the SMPC in Europe. And when you show that you know what you're talking about, it helps you. And yeah, labeling is definitely just like in other ones, like an easier avenue to break into. But yeah, PharmDs are definitely qualified to work in labeling.
Awesome. And then Danielle, going to you with the same questions. And then you and I will kind of like speed our answers up because we want people to have enough time for the reviews.
I mean, I think for the most part, the biggest rewarding piece I have in my job is the fact that I have been able to work globally, and I do have a really good appreciation for cultures and diversity. And it's since day one in pharma, it's always changed my outlook on everything, because we tend to be very US centric in this country. And I come from a small town, which is very US centric. So that's the most rewarding part for me, is to be able to see the global nature of how we all work together and why it's important that we take care of our neighbors in other countries, including drug development, because this COVID thing alone can show you where everything has been made, where things are coming from. It is not a, US, Turkey, China, Russia. We are all in it together. And I think that's been the biggest piece for me that I enjoy the most, as well as just the matrix team environment. Again, I think the most challenging for me is I am also sort of a little bit of a checkbox person. So I kind of like when something is done and you can move on. However, spoiler alert, you're never done in regulatory. Okay. It's not glamorous. You're never done. There's always changing, countries change. You're always getting like last minute, like Arthur said, last minute updates on whatever day, and you have 24 hours to turn it over for Canada. But again, that's also the nature of the beast. So if you like to work in that type of environment and you like to, constantly be challenged and up your game, regulatory is it, because it does not stand still. Once you think you learn all the rules, which I thought I learned a few years ago, they've all changed. So that is the challenging piece for me, because I do kind of like a nice, neat bow, and we definitely don't have that nice, neat bow. For the people that are out there who are saying, pharma is a lucrative business. It is an amazing, place to work. I've worked in a number of pharmaceutical companies, and it is very, very rewarding to have that patient advocacy and patient care and see drugs come to development. As PharmDs, I'm not a PharmD, but we do have them in CMC regulatory. I know that many of you are well versed in, the pharmaceuticals and the mode of action and things like that. So, I don't think you want, you can go ahead and read the regulations, and that's always very important. Definitely seminars. I would look at, there's an organization called RAPS, if you don't already know about it, Regulatory Affairs Professional Society, I think, or you don't have to necessarily join it, but if you just look online, they have different courses sometimes, and just different events that maybe you could go to. You don't have to be RAPS certified. You can be RIC certified if you want to, but I can tell you in GSK, it doesn't really do a whole heck of a lot. What you want to do is you want to tell, if you're looking at an interest in that environment, in any of the regulatory environments, attention to detail, how to work within the guidelines, which I know you do because you're going to be a pharmacist. So, your ethical nature, your, broad thinker, those types of skill sets fit into regulatory. So those are the kinds of things you really want to put forward. And because that skill set, anyone can teach you the regulations, but if you don't know how to have that skill set and make it work in that environment, then it's not a good fit. But yeah, so that's definitely key from me.
Thank
Shanice,
you.
quick
Thank you.
enough?
Perfect. So I'm gonna like really speed through mine, and then if I need to elaborate, we can kind of elaborate in the rooms real quick. Most satisfying job or most satisfying part is being able to see so many types of different pieces and kind of put my creative hat on, and also working like cross-functionally with the team. It's cool to be able to see how different functional areas view essentially the same thing. In the same essence, that is also a challenge because you're working cross-functionally with people who are seeing the same thing but are looking for different things. So our commercial folks have their business objectives that they're trying to meet, right? But we as the regulatory body have like certain guardrails that they need to play within, as well as our medical colleagues and our legal, there are certain guardrails. And so sometimes the marketing folks who are the more creative, type force might feel restricted by those guardrails. And so they sometimes tend to push back to say, well, how come we can't say it this way? Or we said it this way in this type of setting or in this piece, what's the problem now? And you have to really be on your step to know, well, the reason why we can't do it this way is because this previous company got an enforcement letter, or we got advisory comments on, not being able to say things that way. So being able to really negotiate, hold your position, and knowing why you're saying something, you can't just say it. You have to kind of know why, because people will ask you, well, why? Why can't we do it this way, right? So that's probably something that's been challenging. But overall, I truly do love my job. I really don't have a lot of complaints. So I have to like dig for what that challenge is. Have to be honest with you guys, it is kind of hard to get into regulatory ad promo without prior experience. So if you can get like an internship or an appy in reg ad promo or with OPDP, like definitely do that. Some companies will definitely take the chance on you, but it's a little few and far between. I don't want to like discourage anybody at all. It's definitely possible because I know several people who have gotten in without having that direct experience, but it can just be a little bit more challenging. And we can talk about it more in depth in the breakout rooms.